Hi folks, and welcome to a slightly longer edition of From Amateur to Expert Daily. Today's episode is dedicated entirely to writers, and in particular writers of non-fiction. About a week ago, I put out a video asking what you might like to know about the world of writing, and I've received some fantastic questions, and what I'm quite thrilled about is that they come from all over the world. And today I'll do my best to answer them for you and to provide you with some insights, direction and specific actionable steps that you can take in order to promote your writing and your world. So let's dive right in. Our first question from Visual Thinking asks about finding your focus for the first book and how to distill many ideas to the one that will produce the first book. So that's an interesting dilemma to face, and it's a good problem to have. You have so many ideas that you're not sure which one to follow up on, which one to start with. Well, here's how I would tend to think about it. I would use the expert positioning framework to solve that problem, by which I mean ask yourself who you want to be or where you want to be 2 or 3 years from now. And that is a great way of filtering out the books that you shouldn't write. Now, here's what I mean by that one. Let's say, for example, that your goal is to position yourself as a top-level coach and your desired clientele might be CEOs and high-level leaders. In that case, you want to write the book that appeals to that demographic, and you don't want to write a book that takes you away from that demographic. So, for example, writing a book on entry-level customer skills would be the wrong move for you. Writing the book on how a top-level CEO could engage in strategy, engage in the next move, think about this scenario, whatever the case might be, would be the correct move for you. Your book will drag you in the direction that you will go over the next couple of years. So make sure that you are writing the one that takes you to the end result you find desirable. That's a useful framework for answering that question. Our next one from Onatida, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Is there a list of agents who deal with the publishing houses who can assist with getting books accepted by the publishers? Now that question is going to be answered differently in different places around the world. In my country, for example, our book market is relatively small. So we don't particularly have agents in this country. We may have one or two, I'm not aware of them. I've never used an agent, and I deal directly with Penguin in South Africa. Now, I know in places like the United States, Great Britain, around Europe, possibly in Australia, places where there are larger publication industries and larger industries in total, you very definitely have to use an agent. Now, the key here is agents equal credibility. It is entirely possible to show credibility without the agent. So if, for example, you are already a leading name in whatever it is that you do and whatever you propose to write about, you might not actually need the agent. Agents have the credibility that opens doors, and because they filter out the non-credible, publishers tend to trust them a little more. Now, in a situation like in South Africa, you can approach the publisher directly. The way to do that is with great respect and following all of their rules. What do I mean by their rules? Well, take a Penguin or a Pan Macmillan. If you simply go onto their websites, they will have very clear guidelines for how they prefer to be approached. And it's fairly simple. It's things like there will be a correct editor for your type of material. And they'll ask you a series of questions. Do you meet this standard? Have you fulfilled that criteria? And they will show you how to submit your book. And they will tell you how not to submit your book. So, for example, if they take email submissions only, do not send them a mail copy. It's going to be instantly disqualified. So make sure that you meet all of the basic criteria, and that will help you to gain credibility. Now, in terms of approaching a publisher directly without the agency, there are a few things that you need to prove. You need to prove that you are a formidable name in that area and that you know how to sell books. I know for a lot of artists and authors, that can be a little off-putting. We tend to think, I want to be a purist, I want to be a writer, and I want to be an alchemist of words. I don't want to be a salesperson. Well, it's not as bad as what it sounds. You do not have to be out there knocking on doors and selling books in a classical sales role. What they're more interested in is there a market for the books? Are you willing to appear in the media? Are you willing to do interviews and to speak in public? Is there something you can do to contributing to the flow of book sales? If, for example, like in my world, I'm a professional speaker, so that leads itself very logically into book sales. I sell books when I speak. I'm able to reference the books in my presentations. I'm often in the media and so forth, and all of that helps. I also have membership in various groups, and that can be a help as well. I'm a member of Toastmasters International. I'm a member of the Professional Speakers Association. That's affiliated to speakers associations around the world. I'm a member of Mensa, which has chapters and branches all around the world, and all of that helps. That's the kind of thing that editors are interested in. Are you able to sell books? Are you a credible name? Is there something that you can do that helps them to get books into the hands of consumers? And that combination of credibility on the one hand, why are you the expert? Why are you the right person to write this book? And I can help to sell, will get you through that door, or at least will make life a lot easier. Onatida asks again, do you have a coaching program designed to help writers who want to learn how to write creatively and also get the material published? I definitely pay for that one. No, I don't, but send the check and I'll create it in the interim. It's a good idea, and thank you very much. I'll put some thought into that one. KS Tan asks, does one need to learn how, or are there any secrets in structuring eloquent sentences, creative storytelling, appealing topics? How do we deliver what most readers want and enjoy reading the book? That is an excellent question. Now here we're talking about the actual writing itself. How do you make your writing come alive? There is one thing above all others that I would encourage you to do, and it is this: get your readers to see visuals. It's the difference between speaking in abstraction and taking them through a mini story. Let me give you a practical example of that. Speaking in abstraction, you might say something like, a top-level CEO engages with culture. Now, there's no picture there. You don't see moving imagery in the mind. To change that, you might say something like, you walk into your office in the morning and you notice this happening just outside of the door. You start to speak to the people involved and they tell you the following story. And that's when you realize. Now you see the difference there. We're saying the same thing, but we're saying it with pictures. Cognitive psychologist Steven Pinker says that that's the best way to write and the best way to speak. And I profoundly agree with him. I get to try this out in two different forms of media. I get to try it out in book writing and in speaking, and I absolutely promise you it works in both. You want to be less abstract and more real, more engaging in terms of moving visuals in the imagination. Make them see things. Now, there are also clever things that you can do, such as keeping your point to the end. Malcolm Gladwell exceeds at this one. He will open up a chapter by creating an interesting story, but he will hide the point of the story. It is only toward the end that he reveals the point or the moral. And what he's doing there is he is creating suspense by not giving away the point early on. There is a great book on this one, and I recommend the audio one, called Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath. Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath. Listen to the audiobook. And what that book does is it goes into detail about the kinds of things you can do like that to create tension, to create storytelling, to make the writing come alive. Now, I realize that's not quite the same answer as how do you make a sentence more eloquent, but I think it's the more important answer. We need people to see visuals and to be emotionally invested in the thing that you're saying. That's goal number one. The excellence and the eloquence of the sentences is secondary. It is important, but that really is a matter of how often you read, how often you write, and the degree to which you engage with language. The more you do so, the better you become at it. There is a thought from Stephen King on this one, who said in his book on writing, I am astonished by the number of writers or people who want to be writers who say that they don't read books. And he says it makes no sense. It's bizarre, and I completely agree with him on that one. To be a writer, you have to be a reader as well. Now, there's an interesting way around this problem if for some strange reason you don't like picking up physical books. And it's this: listen to audiobooks. In fact, listening to audiobooks might actually be more valuable to you in terms of your eloquence and the excellence of your sentences because you hear it out loud. I would also advise you, as you write, read your sentences out loud so that you can hear their musicality, their flow, their eloquence, their excellence. If you don't read it out loud, you end up once again with an abstract representation on a page. But once you hear the flow of the sentences, you start realizing that there are ways of making it more musical. Lots of things will jump out at you if you do that. For example, if you've used a word repeatedly in a paragraph, you'll hear it and you'll go, okay, we need to replace that one with a synonym. And this one can stay because it's sufficiently far away from the first use of the word that it doesn't sound clunky. Lots of things will jump out at you when you start reading it out loud. You'll also discover the power of contrasting long sentences with short ones. A long, waffling, philosophical sentence that explores something in detail, followed by a sentence that says, so why not? Short, sharp, and punchy contrasted against long. That kind of rhythm will start to become apparent to you the more you read, the more you hear audiobooks, and the more you read your own writing out loud. Okay, Yoka, one of my friends and fellow speakers in South Africa, asks, how do you determine the target audience for the book and if there's a market for it? How do you decide about a number of words? How do you get to your title? What's your process of writing a book proposal to a publisher? Let's take those one by one. Determining the target audience, again, I would say start by determining where you want to position yourself. The interesting thing about that is you might not sell a great number of books. So say, for example, you are writing for the CEO market. That might mean that you will not sell as many books as you might if you were writing a generic book on wealth principles or prosperity or motivation. However, it will do more for you in terms of your business and your positioning, and I would say that that is the number one prize. Second part of the question there, how do you decide about number of words? Okay, how long is a piece of string? Let's talk about word count for a moment here. New aspiring authors tend to think in terms of number of pages. I want you to put that metric out of your mind. Pages are irrelevant. Word count is the correct metric. Most programs like Microsoft Word will give you an instant word count as you go along, and that's very useful. If we had to ask ourselves what is a minimum word count that might qualify as a book, I would say that anything over, say, 30 to 35,000, you have a small book on your hands. I set myself a challenge for my latest one, Poverty Proof, 50 Ways to Train Your Brain for Wealth. I originally intended that this should be something like Sun Tzu's Art of War, a tiny little book that could sit on a counter at bookstores and at airports and so on. And I failed miserably on that one. What happened was I kept realizing that there was more critical information to add to the book, and I eventually stopped at 38,000 words instead of my estimated 20. So this is a 38,000 word book. It is my smallest book by a very large margin, just to give you some idea of the size of the text there. So that's 38,000 words, and it is selling very well. I'm told by Penguin that wealth literature tends to outsell everything else. Interesting little side note there. Anything to do with raising riches, achieving wealth, escaping poverty, apparently just tends to do better than anything else. Now, that is my second book on the topic of wealth. The first one was titled, Is Your Thinking Keeping You Poor? That one is also a bestseller. Now, in terms of a higher word count, this is probably my largest, in fact, this is my largest book with Penguin, What Makes Them Great. This is a book on expert positioning, how to be the top name in your industry, and this one came out at 75,000 words. So, when you look at this, I would call this an average to slightly larger book in terms of what you would see on the shelves of the business section in a store. That's 75,000 words right there. And I think based on the comparison of the two, all of my other books fall in between them. This one is about, I think, 68,000 words and so forth. By looking at those, you get the impression that an average book, if there is such a thing, is probably somewhere in the 50 to 70,000 word range. You can safely go up to 100,000 words before calling it a large book. Over 100,000 words, you really have something quite substantial on your hands there. And I would give you this guideline. If you are a leading expert in your topic matter, then it is safe to go over 100,000 words because you can justify it. You have much to say. But if you are a first-time author and you're not a leading authority on that topic, I would stay well clear of writing books that big. I would tend to say shorter is better. And I think in terms of a safe word count, 50 to 60,000 words would be a good way of looking at it. Nevertheless, the word count itself is really not the priority. The priority is the strength of the material, making it come alive and getting the job done. You do not have to summarize the topic since the dawn of time. You don't have to write everything that is known about that topic. You can start with an assumed base of knowledge and then simply take it further. Or you can actually you can do it the other way around, where instead of doing the expert version, you do the entry-level version. That can be very powerful. Say someone like myself who's been a professional speaker for over 15 years, I have the option of writing a book on public speaking for top experts and CEOs, or for entry-level amateurs who are terrified and doing their first speech. Those would be very different books. Each would be valuable, but to a completely different target audience. So the key lesson there is it's not actually about the word count, it's about the value to the audience. Say it well, make it come alive, and don't say anything more than has to be said for that audience. Let's take another example of that. If you're writing on a topic like overcoming fear, you can be extremely specific. You might be writing the book on overcoming fear for the teenage girl dating for the first time. Now, in a book like that, you do not have to summarize everything that humanity knows about fear and the brain and psyche and psychology and so on. You can simply hone in on what that target market needs to know and what's useful to them. And in fact, the more focused your book is, the better it tends to sell. I find that the larger and more generic a book is, the worse it does. And I think that's well worth noting. Some good questions there. Okay, so how do I get to my title? I always want something a little snappy, and I'm not afraid to be controversial and to poke a little. Take the title of the book, Is Your Thinking Keeping You Poor? Think about that for just a second. It's vaguely accusatory. It's a little bit of a poke and a nudge, and it's also a bestseller. I am not afraid to use a slightly controversial title and something that's going to jump out. And I think if you look at the bookstores and what's sitting at number 1, places number 1 to 10 in terms of bestsellers, you will often find that it is the punchier, even the more controversial titles that tend to get noticed. It applies even if you're writing something fairly dry. You might write a historical book about the circumstances surrounding the rise of National Socialism in Germany. And that's a very dull title. Or you might have a title like Why Hitler Did It. And that's a very powerful title. It's the same book, but it's the punchiness that stands out for you. Funny thing to consider, just combining the ideas of titles and word count. The smaller your book is, weirdly enough, the more of a problem it creates in terms of publicity. Because a lot of the stores will tend to put them this way on the shelves. Now you've got a very small spine. So if you have a larger book, you actually fill more book space and you are more noticeable. Don't tell anyone, but when I walk into bookstores, if I find my book like this, I take it out and I put it back like this. So if you are the owner of a bookstore and you find the Douglas Kruger books keep facing outward, well, now you know why. Okay, next one. Hi Doug, I'd like to know the best, cheapest and easiest ways to publish books. I find that most ways of publishing only take undue advantage of writers, and they earn more than the writers do. And how can one best recoup their value in monetary terms? And that's from IO. It's a good question. I don't see the relationship between a writer and publisher as exploitative. Firstly, they are a business. They have to make money. And secondly, we gain a great deal of value and leverage by being published by the Pan Macmillans and Penguins and big name publishers of the world. They create a great deal of credibility for us. When you actually go into detail about the publishing process, you'll find that although, let's say a book sells for $20 or 200 US rands, even though you're only getting about 10% of that as the author, the costs go to all manner of other things as well. It's the editor, it's the typesetter, it's the publicity, it's the distribution of the books. And if I can stop on that one, distribution, that one thing alone for me is invaluable. I can self-publish a book, anyone can self-publish a book, but the amount of errors that creep through tends to be astronomical. The act of self-publishing can look a little desperate, and finally that distribution idea, I can't get a self-published book into bookstores. It has been done. I know of someone who has done it. I don't know how they did it, but it is much easier to go via a publisher. Now, here's something that most people don't know. If you have published via a commercial publisher, so take my relationship with Penguin. Out of every book sold for, say, about 250 Rand in stores, you might give it a rough equivalent of, say, 25 US dollars. I take 10% of that, so that's going to be about 25 Rand. However, those are not my only sales through the publisher. Here's what also happens. I can order stock of my own books. Now, if I have a big event coming up with, say, 500 people in the audience, I can order 500 books in one go. Now, there are two ways of doing this. Let's say, for example, the convener of an event wants 500 books in one go. That's the best case scenario for me. I place the order with Penguin. Penguin delivers it free of charge to the convener. I don't even touch the books, and I get half of the profit. So even though that is a commercially published relationship, I nevertheless end up with a significant profit margin. Option B goes like this. I buy the books in advance, and I sell them at the back of the room. I have a little cash point machine, so I'm able to take credit cards. Nobody brings cash anymore, so you have to have one of those. And there are cheaper options and ways of doing that. And what typically happens there is I would buy a copy of the book for 100 Rand a unit, and I sell it for the same price that they go in stores, 250, 220, thereabouts. So I am making 100% more than that profit. So that's well worth considering when you think about the nature of a relationship with a publisher. Even if you are only selling books at 10% profit margins. If the books sell in large numbers, obviously that begins to add up. South Africa, again, is a very small market. It is quite difficult to live off proceeds of book sales in South Africa. But if you're able to sell into bigger markets like the United States and Europe, well, that's a game changer. You can also multiply your value by reading the book for Audible. Now, there may be some production costs involved. In my particular case, I've bought a high-end microphone, I've soundproofed my own room, I do everything, and I'm also in a uniquely fortunate scenario in that Penguin in South Africa, which is different to Penguin in America or Britain, has no relationship with Audible. And so they've said they're not interested in getting involved, you do it. And what that means for me is that every book that is downloaded on the Audible platform, all of the profits go to me. Penguin haven't asked for a cut on that, and that is extremely generous of them. Nevertheless, even if they did, every book sale would mean profit for you, and there are no costs entailed after that of production. So that's well worth checking out. If you're interested in the having a look at the pricing and so forth on the Audible books, audible.com, type in Douglas Kruger, and it will take you to all 7 of my books. They're all available there. In fact, there are 8 of my books there. And the reason for that is one of them is a guide to becoming a professional speaker. So that qualifies as a short audio book as well. And therein lies another little trick that we can take advantage of. If you have a commercially published book on Audible, you can also do seminars, programs, and so forth. And that again is entirely yours. Doesn't depend on a publisher. Okay. Tactic Lee says, "Hi Douglas, I'm making headway into my professional speaking business and I'm now busy with the first book." Excellent, glad to hear it. "I struggle with getting the ideas out when I sit down to write. Would you recommend recording myself actually speaking on the topic and then listening to it and paraphrasing for the book, or how else can I get the writing to flow better?" That's a great question. Yes, if you are a speaker as well as a writer, you are in a fantastic scenario. You get to deliver the stories out loud and see how audiences react. And what I find tends to happen is that a speech that you have been delivering for 10 years evolves over that 10-year period so that it is never the same speech twice. One of the speeches I've been doing for well over 10 years now is Own Your Industry, How to Position Yourself as an Expert. And I find that every time I deliver it, the stories kind of merge, change, evolve, mutate, and you find what audiences like and what they respond to, and you drop the things that they don't. So if you have the option of doing that, absolutely. Now here's something that works equally well for speakers and writers. If you're struggling to get into the zone, the chances are there is a great deal of introductory waffle going on. The worst speeches begin like this. "Hi folks, glad you're here. Gosh, what lovely weather outside. You all look fantastic. Give yourselves a round of applause. Well, this is my name, and gosh, today I'm going to be speaking about this." Don't do that. What you do instead is you walk onto a stage and you say, 50 years ago, one man got lost in the jungle and it changed everything. Now, what has that done? You have started telling a story and it has impacted the minds of the audience and your mind. It gets you into the zone quickly, and also it gets them into a imaginary space where they are seeing visuals and going with you early on. And I strongly recommend that. In most live speeches that I do, I will use that technique. I use the technique of making the audience the main character. It works in speeches, works in writing. So for the expert positioning one, I'll say something like this. Imagine yourself 3 years from today. You've just finished a large-scale presentation for an audience of 500 CEOs. You walk out to your brand new luxury car and the phone rings. It's a talk radio station. They want to interview you. And I tell this story, this unraveling story about the audience as main character. The audience is positioned as though they have already accomplished the idea that I'm going to run by them later. So I get them to live the end state proposal first. Then I go back and I explain it. So putting that into your context, the question becomes, what's the message for the audience? What are you sharing? What are you teaching? All right, get them to imagine that it has already worked. You can do the same thing in reverse by getting them to imagine a life that has failed as a result of not using that technique. So you can go positive, or you can go negative, or you can do both. Then you get into detail about the idea. I find that helps for me, gets me into the zone very quickly. Okie dokie. Steve Myers asks, how do you leverage your virtual assistant while writing a book? Steve, don't have one, can't answer that. Sorry about that. I am a one-man show. I do work with speaker agencies, and to a large extent, probably about 50% of my speaking business comes in via agencies. So I find, if I can broaden that out into a talk about how do I manage my life, I find what happens is that I write books in something of a fever pitch. I'll have an idea for a while and it kind of bangs around in my head, and I might listen to a couple of audiobooks about it, I might read some books about it, and just let the ideas kind of bubble around in my psyche. And then what will happen is, as I go along, I will notice things, think about things, have little revelations for myself, and I'll make notes about it. I make notes on my phone or I make notes on my laptop, and I will just keep them in bullet point form. Now, I know for myself, when I turn those bullet points into a book, I'm going to have to do two things. I'm going to have to put them in some kind of a chronological order and go, okay, this comes first, that goes later. Then I have to make each point come alive. Making each point come alive is usually about the storytelling. So there's the process in a very quick nutshell. It is jot down all the things I want to say about this topic, and I'll do useful things like make a note of and say, Steven Pinker mentions this idea at 4 hours into the book, or on page 75 of the physical book. And that way I can reference it properly, and I will have the exact wording there. Then I can build on that idea myself. But in terms of how I work around my writing, I pretty much write a book in a month. I'll be thinking about it for 4 months in advance. I'll be jotting down notes, and then I will focus and go. I've just finished writing a book now that came out at some 115,000 words, and I wrote it literally in 1 month. I averaged sort of 5,000 to 7,000 words per day. I had one day where I wrote 10,000 words. That is my all-time record. In terms of other remote assistants or relationships, because I know the people at Penguin now, I find that I can drop them emails as I go along. And I might ask a question, I might say, here's something that I noticed about it in current affairs, and should I incorporate that? Little things like that, so long as I don't push it too far, because they are busy people, they want the end result. They're not actually there to create the book or edit it as you go along. So that really is about the extent of my remote relationships as I go. And what I try to do is I look out for the most important emails during that month, and I'll take the most important calls. But some things will fall apart. And oh well, books are important to me, so I give myself the space to do that. Next question. Byron Watts asks, crafting the right message for the right avatar. Writing the book my audience actually wants to read. And he says it wouldn't hurt my feelings to sell a few books in the process of establishing and getting more credibility. Okay, I think we have touched on how to think of that avatar, the person that you are writing for. So let's talk a little bit then about the idea of credibility. There are many ways you can create and or generate credibility. Let me give you an example of this one. Each thing builds on the thing before it and need not be academic. Now, what I mean by that is you don't have to have an academic qualification to be the person writing the book. Credibility is not necessarily the same thing as an academic qualification. I wrote my first book, Own Your Industry, which is on the topic of how to be the top name in any industry, on the strength of winning a couple of public speaking contests, and then this interesting dynamic where I noticed the phone ringing and people saying, someone said you're the person to talk to, could you come and do a talk for us, could you come and I just started exploring that question. How do you become the go-to name in any industry? And when I approached Penguin, it was with a small amount of credibility from the public speaking contests and a bit of a speaking career. And I said, I've noticed this in my world. I'd like to write a book about how to be the top expert in any world. And that was good enough. Now, I've just written a book, we'll see if this one gets past the publishers, on political correctness and how it does more harm than good. That's my little bugbear in life, and I'm quite passionate about it. And it is, I believe, a deeply researched book. I am not an academic. I do have a degree in philosophy, so I'm going to use that. I'm a member of Mensa, the High IQ Society, so I'm going to use that as well and say, well, he's got a degree in it. He's apparently fairly, can string a sentence together. But here's the main credibility I'll use for that. In the 2 books on wealth, I have written about how certain ideas surrounding creating wealth have 2 narratives. There's the politically correct version and there's the true version. So now, because of those previous books, I have a little bit more credibility to write the next one. And that's how you can do it. You can generate credibility. Let's say you're starting from scratch. You have nothing. Do this. Write an article. Write a well-structured, well-thought article and get it published somewhere. Doesn't matter if it's a small community newspaper, a newsletter, an e-zine, but better if it's something like an Entrepreneur or a Forbes magazine or something with credibility. With that, you can then go to the publisher and you can say, I am the author of this article published in this magazine. That's the credibility. I'd like to write the book on it. What do you think? Even that can be enough to generate the credibility necessary to get a book published. Okay, next one along. Somebody advertising cannabis. I think we can skip that one. Anant Munshi writes, Hi Douglas, you're doing wonderful work. Thanks. I've written 3 books and looking for a good publisher for my next one. I need one specific thing, how to capture my thoughts on the go, as I cannot get time to write. Because no matter what I do, I can't write more than 3,000 words in a day. Anant, you are writing more than Stephen King. He reckons he writes about 2,500 words a day. The thing is, he writes 2,500 words every day. And that's 2 books a year. So 3,000 words a day is exceptionally good. If you even cut back, but kept it up consistently, you'd be absolutely fine. I mean, think about that for a second. So to write 30,000 words, if you're writing 1,000 words a day, 30,000 words, that's 1 month. Yeah? If you keep it up at 1,000 words a day for 2 months, you've got 60,000 words. That's a book. That's not that bad. And I encourage you to think of it that way. It is not a massive project. It's a long essay. That's all a book is. So you almost want to lower the bar in your own mind and make it easier for yourself. In terms of capturing ideas on the fly, here's something that happens to me a lot. I'll be driving and I can't make a note on my phone. So I go, hey Siri, make a voice note. And Siri goes, what do you want the note to say? And I'll say, make a note about the importance of culture from the bottom up as it pertains to CEOs. And Siri will say, here is your voice note. It is about capturing culture from the bottom up as it applies to, and she'll say like armadillos. And that's close enough for me. As long as there are a sufficient number of correct key words, I will know what that means later on. So that's one way that I do it. I will encourage you to capture your ideas on the fly. And I'll tell you why. This happens to me all the time. I'm on the treadmill at gym, I think of something, I make a little note about it, I email it to myself. When I get home, I read the note, and it is as though I have received an email from a stranger. I will look at the note and go, what a great idea. I don't remember having it. And what that indicates to me is that if I hadn't captured it at the time, it would be gone with the wind. So do make sure that you capture your ideas. If you're drifting off in bed and something pops into your head, do not assume it will be there the next morning. It will not. Even if you reach over for a little pad and scribble down, socks go in the cat microwave, that's better than nothing, but make sure you do jot them down. Sue Steele asks, do you choose a book title and chapter names first? Is there a trick to the number of chapters, 7 or 11, often used as options? Is there a minimum number of words? How do you target the book for credibility? Okay, let's look at the chapter titles and so forth. Okay, I do not generally have a title when I begin. It usually emerges over time. As I'm writing, I'll have something will jump out at me and I'll go, that's the punchy little angle. That's the clever way of saying this. And that then tends to become the title. So for example, I wrote the book Own Your Industry, How to Position Yourself as an Expert. I didn't have a title. It was just going to be how to be the top name, how to be the biggest. And as I was writing, at one point I wrote down, and in that way you can own your industry. And I thought that's a nice little turn of phrase. I jumped online and I did some searches to see if there were any other books titled Own Your Industry. And I was quite surprised to discover that they weren't. So I jumped on that and I grabbed it. A similar one, a couple of months ago, not a couple of months, probably about a year or so ago, when I'd finished the manuscript for this one, I went online and I was amazed to find that nobody had ever used the title Poverty Proof in a book, ever. So there it is. I thought, well, I'll grab that one if nobody's using it. So I tend to do the article as a organic result of the writing itself. In terms of the chapter titles, it can be very useful to do a 10 ways to, 5 ways to. All of my books are 50 ways to. Now, the reasoning behind that is actually incredibly simple. There's no deep philosophy to it. I did it for the first one. I liked it. I've stuck to it. In my mind, I have this picture of the Entrepreneur's 50 Ways series, something like the Complete Idiot's Guide to. And in my great vanity, I picture something like a standalone shelf, and it's the 50 Ways series by Douglas Kruger and all of the different titles. So that's why I've done it that way. I think there is some value to be gained in continuity between book titles. So if, for example, you've written Rich Dad, Poor Dad, it is a clever idea to write Rich Dad, Poor Dad for teenagers, what Rich Dad says about the economy, what Rich Dad thinks you should know, and so forth. That's clever in the sense that it builds a brand. My branding is much softer than that. The 50 Ways thing is really more a theme than strong branding. If you can start with strong branding and do that consistently, I would very much encourage you to do it. Become known as the person who does that and the person who has that formula. Definitely a good way to go. Okay, Chris Lanzi asks, regarding the relationship between writing and speaking, 1. Does a book need to be commercially published in order to build credibility as a speaker? Chris, generally yes. The possible exception to that is if you have a large training company and you consistently have people in a room and you're giving out your own material and charging for it. But in terms of launching your own non-commercially published, self-published book, I would say I would tend to steer clear. I've done it. I don't think it's a good idea. Or does a self-published book serve the purpose equally or almost equally as well? No, I don't think so. How much does speaking about the same subject as the book increase sales of the book? Greatly is the answer. It can work both ways and you can enjoy greater revenue from one or the other, but they definitely both back one another up. So writing the book on expert positioning has helped me to land a lot more presentations on that topic. And speaking on that topic helps me to sell a lot more books. And the more you're seen doing both of those, the more the media is interested in you, the more you're invited to do interviews and so forth. Best case scenario, you want to be known as the guy who or the woman who. Take Robert Kiyosaki. I mean, he's got to be the ultimate example of that. Rich Dad, Poor Dad, what a clever framework. He writes on it, he speaks on it, he trains on it, and it's not just one book. Now, last time I checked, it was some 40 different books on the Rich Dad theme, and that is absolutely brilliant. He has built an empire, and he keeps hitting that note. And What's interesting about that is it may get boring for him, but you are marketing to a moving parade. So even though it may be boring for you to keep repeating the same idea, the same message over and over, doing so builds a brand. And new customers, new markets keep coming along all of the time. So remaining known for one thing can be immensely powerful. I can see from the sale of books that if I went 100% into writing about wealth, that would be a career for me. Now, unfortunately for me, I have other interests, and there are things that I'm fascinated by and things that I want to speak on and write about and do. So I don't want to be a wealth guy. But I can tell you now that it would probably be the strongest way forward for me if that was the way I chose to go. Another interesting thing, though, it would not necessarily result in a lot of speeches, at least not for corporate companies. Corporate companies book me for talks on innovation, leadership, expert positioning, but they do not book me for wealth concepts. That is seen very much as an individual thing and stand alone. If you are as big as a Robert Kiyosaki, you can have your own conventions, your own get-togethers. You could be Anthony Robbins, have your own island and people come to you. But in terms of the nature of thing that is booked by a corporate company, you may want to look more at topics like innovation, leadership, culture, that kind of idea. So if you are twinning and combining speaking and writing, what you definitely want to do is ask yourself, what is the biggest market out there, and do you want to write for them? If you are writing self-help books about, say, dating tips for individuals, you are not going to be booked by corporate companies. So again, if you're twinning writing and speaking, that's worth considering. Okay, the next one. Nicholas Robinson writes, "You're a kind guy and thanks for this. You are most welcome. I'm nearly through writing a book on Christianity. Good stuff, I'm a Christian myself. I've taken it back to its original roots and pulled off the veneer that modern Western societies have placed above the original Christianity." Interesting. Yeah, so truth versus historical revisionism. I like it. Once it's complete, I'm guessing somebody has to proofread it. Yes. What are the next steps? Okay. You do not necessarily have to pay someone to proofread it before you go to a publisher. The publisher's job is to proofread, to make sure that it's in a high state of development and to interact with you on that. Nevertheless, the better your manuscript by the time you send it to them, the stronger your argument for publication. It is not a necessary argument for publication. Here's what I mean by that. If you write a brilliant synopsis where you say, this is the clever angle, this is how well this kind of literature sells, this is how well researched it is, this is why I'm the credible person to sell it, and here's how I can get involved in marketing the project, that might be strong enough to sell the book. Then afterwards, you might submit a manuscript to them potentially full of errors, and they go, okay, we've got work to do, but the sales aspect of this is strong and the commercial proposition is strong, so we're willing to go through that amount of work. Now, of course, you don't want to give them another reason to disqualify you. Make the book as strong as you possibly can. And there are a few ways of doing that. One is to give it to a reader that you trust, someone who reads often and for whom glaring errors just jump off the page. To encourage them to make red marks everywhere and to point out as many mistakes as they can. You want the errors, you don't want compliments. The next thing to do is, once you're done, put the book aside, give it a week or two, and then reread it. And preferably, read it out loud. Again, reading it out loud helps you to pick up errors, rhythmic errors, that you might not notice if you're just saying the words in your own head. The reason you want to give it a week or more is because you know what it should say. So you actually want a little bit of critical distance from the book so that you can read it again afresh, and then the errors tend to jump out at you. The next step after that is it's about sales. You are selling an idea to a publisher. So once again, we tend to miss this as authors because we tend to be artists and purists. It is about the business of selling books. Your next step is to write a very strong proposal about why this is important, why it's a new, interesting topic, why it moves the body of knowledge forward, how it's controversial, and it sounds controversial, so play on that. And you want to say, this is a book it's going to poke and prod, and it's going to ruffle some feathers. Don't be shy to say that. Then don't be shy to add, and I'm willing to appear in front of the media and talk about it. So, good way to go there. Next one, Kosi Sibanda asks, Hi, should one take a writing course or attend some kind of training before embarking on writing a book? What's the role of an editor, and is an editor necessary? And before and after releasing the book, what must I be doing to make people get people to buy and read the book? Okay, the writing course. There is a good one available in South Africa. The name eludes me at the moment. Pop back into my head in just a moment's time. I haven't done one. So in terms of my level of education, I have high school. I've always loved literature. I read a great deal. Nothing helps you as much as reading. I have a degree in communication and philosophy. I don't know that that's made much of a difference to my writing. So I think what we're after here is consciousness of writing. You want to be asking yourself, what's good about this book? What's bad about that book? What's the author doing well here that's making this so good? What is this author doing badly that I should avoid? And articulating those differences really helps you to raise your own standard as well. In terms of the role of an editor, most of my interaction with the editors at Penguin tends to be after the fact. So I'm in a fortunate position now where, having written 7 books with them, I can send a proposal and they'll give me a very quick yes or no, and we simply progress from there. But most of my work with editors tends to be just over email, and it's after the book has actually been written. In terms of how they proceed from there, so you write your manuscript, you send it to the editor. They like it, hopefully, they say yes, they say we'd like to throw money at you, sign, and you do that. Now here's what happens next. You get a copy editor assigned to you, and you develop a relationship with this person. The relationship, sadly, is purely over email, but it tends to be quite a good one nevertheless. This person will introduce themselves and say, "Hi, I've been assigned to write your book. Well done on completing it. And here is the schedule. I will be sending you the first set of questions, or the first draft for you to check within the next couple of weeks. Can you then get back to me within 2-3 weeks, whatever the case might be?" And you bounce the manuscript back and forth. Now, take your ego out of the equation here. These people know what they are doing, they know how to strengthen a book, and you should hear them out on their suggestions. The best case scenario is when they simply come back with a few textual errors, grammatical things, and they point that out and they go, "But everything else was perfect." That is unlikely to happen. The chances are they will say, "This has been repeated, can we get rid of this? What if we shorten that?" and so forth. Be open to their suggestions. Having said that, it's your book. So if something is incredibly important to you, and you can see why that one nuanced idea, why that one subtlety has to be there, stick to your guns. You are allowed to argue with them, just do it politely. Next one, Zinzi. Hi Doug, thank you. You came at the right time when I'm about to publish my first book. Oh, good stuff. Question is, how do I write in a way to avoid paying expensive editing and proofreading and book covers and so forth? Okay, so the answer again to that one is you want to get your manuscript into as impeccable a condition as you can and then go the commercial publishing route. And that is about how successfully you approach a publishing house, and all of that begins with their guidelines on their websites. Next one, DK, and this is from Lalo. I wish to know your daily process from morning when you brush your teeth. You're assuming I brush my teeth. To the evening when you go to bed at night. Yeah, your habits and all of that. Okay, it doesn't matter. I will share my habits with you, but your habits may be completely different, and that could result in an excellent book. So I work from home as a professional speaker, and that gives me a great deal of leeway. Authors who are not working from home have a lot more challenge, in the sense that you might have to wake up an hour early before the kids wake up, stay awake an hour later, switch the TV off. Televisions are ideologically opposed to book writing. If you can get rid of yours, you're going to be much more productive, and you'd be astonished how much time you can free up. My process goes like this. I wake up in the morning, I've got a little 2-year-old and I take him to nursery school, and on the way back from nursery school, I start playing an audiobook. I am always listening to audiobooks. I go through 4 or 5 of them per month. I have a contract with Audible where I get 2 books as part of the contract, and then I just end up ordering more of them anyway. I consistently listen to books, so that I'll do that on my drive home. By the time I get home, I'm starting to feel in a philosophical or focused frame of mind, and I might sit down and write for an hour or so. I may then have to answer emails, create my daily video. I might have to go off and do a presentation. I go to gym probably 3 days out of every 4, and then I might come back and do another hour or 2. On the days when, during the months when I write a book, I will tend to put almost everything on hold other than gym, because you can't win that back again. It takes a long time. So what I'll tend to do is I will sit down in the morning and I'll write for 4 or 5 straight hours. Then I'll have something to eat, answer the most urgent emails, and get myself off to gym. Come back and write for a couple more hours. As I've said, my best to date is about 10,000 words in a day. And I will keep that up for a month of frenzied creation while I just get that book over and done with. Then it tends to be about a year before the book actually comes out. So you complete the book, you finish the manuscript, then you send it off to the editor, and it is this long, slow, frustrating process in which they bounce it back to you, yes, no about the book. Here's the person who will be doing the typesetting. Here's the editor. The editor sends you the queries you need to check on. You send it back. Even when it's done, okay, great, it's all done. 6 months from now, it will actually go to print. So I personally find that immensely frustrating. It is rare but possible that an editor will do more than one book with you per year. I had it happen to me once. I had 1 year in which we released 2 books, but Penguin have told me they prefer a year cycle between each book. I believe I could go faster than that if I were allowed to, but I can't, so I don't. Dean Koontz, Stephen King, the big writers of that ilk, particularly in fiction, tend to do 2 books per year. And that may sound like a big ask, but once again, if you're only writing 2,000 words a day, in 1 month you've got 60,000 words. Their average novels tend to be, say, 100 to 150,000 words, so you're looking at maybe 3 months, 4 months worth of work. The rest of the time they can go sailing on their private yachts with topless women, whatever it is that they do. Lalo asks, DK. Okay, now that's the brush your teeth one. Olivia Schofield, a friend and fellow speaker who's UK born and works all over Europe. And Olivia's actually got a speaker's boot camp coming up in Germany in a couple of weeks' time, if you're in the area and want to check that one out. She says, when I ask the question, it's so big it looms over me and crushes me. I'm obviously talking about the idea of writing a book. Please don't just answer, just write 1 small paragraph a day and wham bam, a book is born. I want a painless, feasible and fun path. Well, you can't have one, Olivia. That's not how books work. It's painful. Get over it. And she says, I had thought of getting someone to interview me and then transcribe it, sort it and edit it. Okay, I've heard of people doing that. I'm not sure that that is the best way forward, for the reason that you're going to end up with a documented interview. It's going to sound like a magazine interview. Writing a book, I think, is a little different in the sense that what we really want is great storytelling that leads to a transformative point. Think about Malcolm Gladwell here. His ideas are extremely intellectual, but his formula is very simple. He tells an interesting, mesmerizing story, and at the end, we arrive at a point that we weren't expecting. And we go, that's amazing. And I genuinely believe, Olivia, like myself, good speaking, very much like good writing, is make a point, tell a story. Make another point, tell another story. It's all about making the ideas come alive. If you can do that in interview form, perhaps a good way to go. But I would tend to think that the process of writing is a little different. Unless, for example, you were writing a very small book, and there's nothing wrong with that. This little poverty-proof one is way outselling my other books, and it is by far the smallest of my books. So you don't necessarily have to have a massive book in order to get one out there. And the smaller ones can outsell the bigger ones, particularly in the self-help sphere. People don't necessarily want to open a tome, an encyclopedia, and wade through 100,000 plus words of our sort of intellectual meanderings. What they want is how to solve this problem quickly. And I think for us as speakers, and again, particularly in the sort of self-help sphere, the how-to with explicit steps tends to be very powerful. Twin that with storytelling. It's, here's your disaster, here's what's going wrong. Picture yourself in this scenario. Now, would you rather be in this scenario? Picture this as your new way forward. Here's how you do it. 1, 2, 3, 4. That can be a very simple, very short book. I saw one on YouTube the other day, or rather a book about how to create a YouTube channel the other day. Very short, sharp, to the point, explicit instructions, and extremely successful. So Olivia, there are no simple answers to this one. You're going to have to work hard, but I believe you have it in you. In terms of getting yourself inspired, I really do believe in this idea of lowering the bar. We tend to think of a book as such a big project. I prefer to encourage people to start thinking about their third and fourth book. Don't think of a book as a big one day. Think of it as something you're going to finish before the end of the year. You're going to get it done quickly. You lower the bar and go, what's the least book I could write? And that is a very useful question. It is not a lazy question. It is a judicious question. Because often readers want the least book they could read in order to get those good answers. So give yourself permission, lower the bar, make it smaller, make it easy on yourself, but get started. You'll probably find that once you do get started, the opposite happens. The problem is not writing a big book. The problem is actually writing a small book. So once you get going, it tends to flow. Lovely hearing from you, Olivia. And the last one, Mandana would like to observe that books are very boring and wrong. Okay. Well, that's a useful contribution to the discussion. Thank you so much for that. Folks, if I've missed any, I do apologize for that. Do drop me an email, info@douglaskrugerspeaker.com, and I'll very gladly answer any more questions that you might have, anything that I might have left out. I hope that helps. Here are my books in a very quick overview. First one I wrote, 42-ish thousand words, smallish book, Own Your Industry, How to Position Yourself as an Expert. This one follows the 50 Ways formula, but unfortunately it's not in the title. Could kick myself for that one. That was followed by the second book, which was on innovation, Relentlessly Relevant 50 Ways to Innovate. Now, if I remember correctly, this is about 58, maybe 60,000 words, and it's the practical how-to of thinking about innovation. That was followed by my speaker's book, How to Make Your Point Without PowerPoint, 50 Ways to Present Effectively. And a lot of the kind of ideas that we need as writers and as speakers, you will find in this one. This is about how to make ideas come alive. Now, even if you don't buy the book or download the audio version of it, that's your key to the whole idea of good writing. It's not just the point. It's how do you make it come alive for people? How do you get them emotionally and psychologically invested in it? And the number one way to do that is to get them to think in pictures. Make them the main character. Make the audience, the reading audience, the character going through an event. Extremely powerful technique. That was then followed by the second innovation book, as I learned more about the topic of innovation. This was aimed at a higher level. This is aimed at sort of CEO and leadership levels. They're your rules, break them. 50 ways to smash silos, bust bureaucracy, and create a high-performance culture. What I like about this one is it is not about the latest trends like AI and so forth. Instead, this is about how to think about innovation. Regardless of what's happening around you in terms of technology, it goes, forget the mess, don't listen to the noise. Let's start with your mind and thinking cleverly. There's something, I hope, a little Edward de Bono about that. Then the next one along, after 10 years of speaking on expert positioning and how to be the top expert in any industry, I had so many additional concepts that didn't go into the first one that I thought I have to write a second one. And the second one was bigger than the first one. So this is my biggest book at, I think, about 75,000 words. What makes them great? 50 ways to become the industry leader. This may be useful to you as a writer and speaker because it's all about, again, how to stand out as the top name, how to communicate in persuasive and entertaining ways. That's the go-to one if the point of your writing is to become the top expert. I, for some reason, don't seem to have my Is Your Thinking Keeping You Poor book here. It made an exit stage left. But the second wealth book is Poverty Proof 50 Ways to Train Your Brain for Wealth, and that's the one that's just come out now. So, next one for me is the book on political correctness, and it's how to untangle the kind of ideology that I believe is doing a lot of damage in society these days. I maintain that you can have truth or you can have political correctness. You cannot have both at the same time. And I go into a lot of historical detail about why that is the case and how to untangle it. My gut suspicion on this one, it is probably not going to be a Penguin book. And for a couple of reasons. One, it may be too risky for them. I don't know. They do tend to actually publish controversial books. Two, and maybe more interestingly, it might be a good idea for me to keep my business books with Penguin and a ideology or philosophy book with a different publisher. So I will explore those options. That book is written. I'm now giving it a couple of weeks of rest so that I have fresh perspective on it. It would be by far my biggest book at about 115,000 words, and it could drag my speaking off in a different direction, which is also an interesting idea. So I will report back to you on that one as we go along. I hope that's been useful to you. As I say, drop me any other questions or thoughts that you might have, anything that I haven't answered. It is rewarding. There is something wonderful about having an idea in your mind and turning it into a book. And as a parting thought, in terms of how you can come up with topic matter, let me leave you with this one. A great book can just be a simple notion that no one else has followed through on. For example, the book on how to make your point without PowerPoint. There's nothing excessively original about that. All that happened in terms of the background of that one is, as a speaker, I spent 15 years in conferences bored out of my wits looking at charts and graphs and dots and dashes and people murdering their audiences with the mundane. And I thought, someone should write a book on how to speak without charts and graphs and PowerPoint. And then all I did, and this is the only thing that has distinguished me here, is I went, I'll do it. So when you have those passing thoughts, you're in a meeting and something goes wrong and you go, this frustrating thing happens all the time. Or you observe something to do with success versus failure, a mindset, an issue, a reality, and you go, why don't you just capture that notion? It's the notion that can lead to the book. Same thing with my expert positioning one. Someone calls me and says, a mutual friend said, you're the person to talk to about. And I went, that's interesting. How did that happen? How do you get people to come to you as the recommended name? It was a passing notion. Now it's 2 books. And I really believe that it's just capturing those notions and taking them seriously that is the heart and soul of writing. I will then typically go and read 5 or 6 of the latest best-selling books around that topic. So for example, writing an expert book, I may pick up something like Brendon Burchard, The Millionaire Messenger. Now he comes at the topic of expert positioning from a totally different angle to me. My idea is how to work your way to the top name, like becoming a Branson of business, an Arnold Schwarzenegger, a Jeremy Clarkson in cars, or an Oprah on TV. His angle is, all right, so you want to work from home. How do you become a money-making expert in a vacuum? And I mean, it's fascinating. So I would read a book like that, and I would allow it to influence my thinking on the topic, but I would go in my own direction with the topic. And I'd read 5 or 6, as I say, other best-selling books that bring you up to speed with everything that's known in that area, and just inform your thinking, give it more richness, more depth, more nuance, and that's well worthwhile. What it also tends to do is it points out to you what has been falsified, or in other words, what doesn't apply, what doesn't work, which trends have been discredited. And starting out writing a book, we might not be aware of that. So you've got to read the top experts in that field just to get that landscape. Then you go ahead and you build from there. Write a book, write a good book, and it can position you as an expert, and it can help you to own your industry. Any more questions, drop me an email. Thanks for your time.